Hello everyone, this is Ozic. Welcome to the Practical Grammar Tenses course. As you can see from the table of contents, this series consists of a total of 12 lessons plus supplementary videos, and this is the third lesson. Since all the class guidelines were already explained in the introduction video, I'll skip them here. Still, let me remind you once again, always approach vocabulary through full sentences, not isolated word lists. And don't just pay attention to pronunciation. Keep stress and intonation in mind as well. Also, please remember that all course materials are the result of many years of study and research. So, if you want to use them elsewhere, you must contact us in advance and clearly cite the source. The class booklet has a total of 54 pages, including exercises. You can download it after signing up on our website. I recommend printing it out before class, but if that's difficult, you can split your screen while watching. Of course, you can still follow the lecture without downloading anything. Let me emphasize once again, our goal in studying grammar is very simple. It's to communicate effectively. Alright, from this point, the use of the present tense may feel a bit tricky, but it's extremely important because it appears frequently in exams. So, let's go through it carefully. Sometimes the present tense is used instead of the future tense. We often call this the substitution of the future by the present tense, or simply the present tense for future reference. The first case is when something is already scheduled or officially arranged. In other words, although the event is positioned in the future on the time continuum, it is expressed using the present tense under certain conditions. Let's look at the checklist for those conditions. First, it happens with verbs of motion, verbs describing coming, going, departing, or arriving. You don't need to memorize every single word in this category. Just remember that they often describe transportation schedules, such as flights or train times. So if an event follows a fixed timetable, the present tense may replace the future. For example, even the verb meet can belong to this group since meetings are scheduled movements or appointments. Second, even though these are verbs of motion, they rarely replace the future tense by themselves. They usually appear with a time marker, an adverb or expression that indicates a specific time in the near future. This habit actually traces back to Old English. Also, this substitution generally applies when the event concerns a near or definite future, something scheduled or planned, rather than something far off. Here are some examples. The train leaves at 7, so we need to hurry. You could say the train will leave at 7, but using the present tense works perfectly because the event is clearly scheduled for the future. The time marker at 7 makes it obvious. My parents arrive in Seoul tomorrow morning, and I feel so happy about it. Again, because of the time marker tomorrow, the present tense naturally replaces the future tense. We return from our trip this Saturday evening, so we'll have Sunday off before going back to work. Our cruise departs for Jeju Island this afternoon, and everyone's excited. We meet the new manager tomorrow morning at 10 to discuss the project details. She takes the train to Boston this Friday for a job interview. If you look closely, you'll find two common features among all the underlined verbs. Each comes with a red time marker, an explicit reference to a specific future time. Each refers to a definite schedule in the near future. Let's listen. Focus on pronunciation, rhythm, intonation, and how the tense functions.
The train leaves at 7 o'clock, so we need to hurry.
I'm glad that my parents arrive in Seoul tomorrow morning.
We return from our trip this Saturday evening, so we'll have Sunday to rest before work starts again.
Our cruise sails for Jeju Island this evening, and everyone is excited.
We meet the new manager at 10 a.m. tomorrow to discuss the project details.
She rides the train to Boston this Friday for a job interview.
Keep in mind, although the present tense can replace the future tense with motion verbs, it's not mandatory. The future tense remains grammatically correct. The difference rests mainly in nuance. Unfortunately, many grammar books mistakenly teach that you must use the present tense in this case, but that's not true and should be corrected. However, and this part is key, in this example, the verbs underlined in blue are also motion verbs, yet you cannot use the future tense there. They must, without exception, use the present tense to indicate future meaning. Why do you think that is? Let's go over this carefully. This is one of the most frequently tested grammar points, but also one that causes the most confusion. Many of you have probably memorized the rule without truly understanding it. You might have heard, in adverbial clauses of time or condition, the present tense is used instead of the future tense. If you've just memorized it without fully grasping why, this explanation will finally make sense of it, and you'll never have to memorize it again. Imagine a sentence structure on the time continuum with one clause containing one subject and one verb, and another clause joined by a conjunction. The first part is called the main clause, and the following one, the subordinate clause. When both clauses refer to the future, that is, when the main clause is in the future tense, and the subordinate clause also refers to a future event, the subordinate clause sometimes uses the present tense instead of the future tense. Here's how to make that clear and simple. The subordinate clause must be an adverbial clause, not a noun clause or a relative clause. The conjunction must express time or condition, such as if, when, before, after, as soon as, etc. If either of these two conditions is not satisfied, you must use the future tense as usual. Now, identifying whether a subordinate clause is a noun, adjective, or adverb clause might sound intimidating, but don't worry. For this rule, it's easy. An adverbial clause is movable. You can usually switch its position with the main clause without changing the meaning, but if you move it to the beginning, you must add a comma afterward. In contrast, noun and adjective clauses cannot be moved. Let's look at an example. In the example we just saw, if we move the subordinate clause with the time conjunction before to the front, the meaning stays the same. The main clause still uses the future tense, but the subordinate clause uses the present tense to refer to a future action. Another example, we won't go out if it rains tomorrow. In this sentence, moving the subordinate clause with the conjunction if, which indicates a condition, to the beginning does not change the meaning. Also, although the main clause uses the future tense, we can see that the subordinate clause uses the present tense to refer to a future event. So in short, if a clause introduced by a conjunction can be moved around, and if it expresses time or condition, then the subordinate clause uses the present tense instead of the future tense. However, as shown in the next example, even though if appears, the meaning may change, or the sentence may stop making sense, if we move it to the front. That means it's not an adverbial clause, so it doesn't meet the checklist conditions. In that case, use the future tense normally. Now let's listen and read along. Focus especially on how adverbial clauses move within the sentence.
Before work starts again, we will have Sunday to rest.
If it rains tomorrow, we won't go outside.
We're not sure if it will rain tomorrow.
Here's the deeper reason. When a conjunction expresses time or condition, it already implies a future event by its meaning. Therefore, using the future tense again would be redundant. The subordinate clause simply provides background or context for the main clause, which already shows an action or state in the future. Because the main clause already marks futurity, the adverbial conjunction and the situation make that clear enough. That's why the subordinate clause switches to the present tense to express an already determined future in a simple, consistent way. If both clauses use the future tense, the sentence would feel cluttered and overly repetitive. This phenomenon is known in linguistics as linguistic economy, simplifying structures while maintaining clarity and meaning. And this tendency is not unique to English. Many languages follow the same pattern, using the present tense in adverbial clauses of time and condition. For example, in the sentence, "I'll call you when I get home," as you can see on this screen, not only in English but in many other languages as well, the present tense is used in place of the future tense. The context itself already indicates a future event. So again, there was never any need to memorize this substitution rule mechanically. Now, let's examine the conjunctions that express time or condition one by one. I've gathered all the conjunctions that have frequently appeared on exams into a single list. You can find a summary table on page 7 of your textbook. In this video, we'll analyze each conjunction in detail first, and at the end, we'll review that table together. All of the examples from here on describe future events and reflect actual test trends. Before we begin, let's review our checklist once more. The clause must be an adverbial clause that can move freely in the sentence. Its conjunction must express time or condition. Only when both conditions are met do we use the present tense instead of the future tense in the subordinate clause. For example, when she finishes her degree next year, she will start working at an international company that has already offered her a position. If we move the adverbial clause beginning with when, the meaning does not change. So, the main clause stays in the future tense, but the subordinate clause must use the present tense to describe the future. However, the next example is different. No one knows when the new CEO will announce her plans for the company. Here, although when is used, moving the clause changes the meaning. When the new CEO announces her plans, no one knows. Sounds strange, regardless of whether it's grammatically correct or not. Since it's not an adverbial clause, we keep the future tense in the subordinate clause. Now, repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
When she finishes her degree next year, she will start working at an international company that has already offered her a position.
Nobody knows when the new CEO will announce her plans for the company.
Next conjunction. While staying in Paris next summer, you'll have a chance to visit lesser-known museums that most tourists miss. If we move the clause beginning with while, the meaning stays the same. So, the main clause uses the future tense, and the subordinate clause uses the present tense, in this case, the present continuous, because while emphasizes ongoing activity. Consider this next example. This sentence can have two different meanings depending on the context. While you're working next week, I'll be on vacation. Or, although you're working next week, I'll be on vacation. In both meanings, the clause can move freely without altering the sense. However, in the second meaning, when while means although, it does not express time or condition. Thus, the second checklist condition fails, and we must use the future tense. Now repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
You will take the opportunity to visit some of the lesser-known museums that most tourists miss while you are staying in Paris next summer.
While you'll be working next weekend, I'll be on vacation.
I'll be on vacation, although you'll be working next weekend.
Next example. As soon as the new regulation goes into effect next month, all employees will need to submit updated security credentials to the HR department, which means as soon as the new rules go into effect next month, all employees will need to submit updated information that proves who you are to the HR department. Since the clause introduced by as soon as can move freely and expresses time, both checklist conditions are satisfied. Therefore, the main clause uses the future tense and the subordinate clause uses the present tense. Now, repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
As soon as the new regulations come into effect next month, all employees will be required to submit updated security credentials to the HR department.
The expressions, the moment, and the minute in the next examples mean the same as soon as, so they function as time expressions requiring the present tense in the subordinate clause. As soon as you get off the plane overseas, you realize that everything around you feels new and unfamiliar, and that's when your real adventure begins. Here, the main clause uses the future tense, but the subordinate clause uses the present tense. Then why is when in the pink part expressed with the future tense? Simple. When we move the clause, the sentence becomes awkward. That means it's not a movable adverbial clause, so the future tense must remain. Now repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
The moment you step off the plane in a foreign country, you will realize that everything around you is new and unfamiliar, and that's when the real adventure will begin.
The minute you step off the plane in a foreign country, you will realize that everything around you is new and unfamiliar, and that's when the real adventure will begin.
Next example. Every time you call me after you move abroad, I'll be happy to hear updates about your new life. The conjunction every time, meaning whenever, introduces a movable adverbial clause, so it meets both conditions. Therefore, the main clause is in the future tense, and the subordinate clause uses the present tense. And for the pink part, after you move abroad, we again have a time conjunction, after. So, when we move it, the meaning stays consistent, confirming present tense use in the subordinate clause. Now repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
Every time you call me after you move abroad, I will be happy to hear your stories about your new life.
Next, after the construction ends next spring, the city will hold a special event to open the new park to the public. Here, after is another time conjunction that can be moved, so the main clause uses the future tense and the subordinate clause the present tense. Now consider this less common example. I'm waiting for the day after you graduate. This clause cannot move, which means it doesn't act as an adverbial clause. Therefore, the future tense remains as it is. Now, repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
After the construction finishes next spring, the city will open the new park to the public with a special ceremony.
I'm waiting for the day after which you will graduate.
Next, you won't be able to access the database until the system administrator grants you permission later next week. The until clause can move freely, meeting both checklist conditions, so the main clause is in the future tense, while the subordinate clause uses the present tense. Now repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
Until the system administrator grants you permission later next week, you will not be able to access the database.
Next example, unless you finish your assignment before the deadline, you won't be allowed to participate in the group project, which starts next week. Unless, meaning if not, introduces a conditional adverbial clause, so its position can change without affecting meaning. The main clause stays in the future tense, and the subordinate in the present tense. Then why is the verb in the underlined part, describing a future event, in the present tense? Because it's one of the verbs of motion we studied earlier. Again, this is not mandatory. Using will start in the future tense would not be grammatically wrong. Let's listen carefully and check pronunciation and stress.
Unless you finish your assignment before the deadline, you will not be allowed to participate in the group project that starts next week.
Let's look at the next example. Regardless of your decision to move to a new city, your colleagues will respect your decision and continue to support your career goals. The conjunction whether introduces a conditional clause, and even if you change the position of the clause, there's no change in meaning. Therefore, the main clause uses the future tense, while the subordinate clause uses the present tense. However, what about the following sentence? The manager doesn't know whether the proposal will be changed before the meeting. Although this sentence uses the same conjunction as the one above, if you change the order of the clauses and say whether the proposal is revised or not, the manager doesn't know. The meaning changes slightly. Also, we can no longer tell exactly what it is that the manager doesn't know. Therefore, it cannot be considered an adverbial clause. In other words, the first condition on the checklist is not met. So, we keep the future tense. Let's listen carefully and check pronunciation and stress.
Whether you choose to move to a new city or not, your colleagues will respect your decision and continue to support you in your career goals.
The manager doesn't know whether the proposal will be revised before the meeting.
Now let's look at the next example. It's a bit long, but don't panic. Take it slowly and absorb the information in the order it's given. Once you have completed the online orientation and set up your official company email, you will then be able to access all internal resources and participate in your team's video meetings without any limitations. Some of the words may look a bit difficult, but as long as you understand the meaning, this isn't very hard, right? Again, the conjunction once, which means if, as long as, or after, can move around in the sentence without changing the meaning. Therefore, the main clause uses the future tense and the subordinate clause uses the present tense. Now, repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
Once you complete the online orientation and set up your official company email, you will gain access to all the internal resources and be able to join your team's virtual meetings without any restrictions.
Now, let's look at a more difficult conjunction. It doesn't look like a conjunction, but it's actually quite common. Provided that means almost the same as if, but it's used more often in formal documents. If you submit all the necessary documents by tomorrow, your visa application will begin processing without any delay, and you will be able to travel as planned. Since if and provided that are almost identical in meaning and function, the subordinate clause can be moved around. Therefore, the main clause uses the future tense, and the subordinate clause uses the present tense. Now repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
Provided that you submit all the necessary documents by tomorrow, your visa application will be processed without any delay, and you will be able to travel as planned.
Now, let's look at the next example. As long as you keep your phone charged during the trip, you will be able to contact us anytime you need help. The conjunction as long as means if only you keep doing something. The meaning does not change even if this clause is moved. Therefore, the main clause uses the future tense and the subordinate clause uses the present tense. You can now see why the pink-colored part is in the present tense. As explained earlier, it's also because the position of the clause doesn't affect the meaning. Now, repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
As long as you keep your phone charged during the trip, you will be able to contact us whenever you need help.
Here's the next example. Take an umbrella. just in case you might need it, since it might rain later this afternoon. The weather forecast says there might be a shower. In case or in case that is one of the conditional conjunctions, meaning in preparation for the possibility that something might happen. Since changing the position of the clause doesn't change the meaning, the main clause uses the future tense and the subordinate clause uses the present tense. Now repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
In case it rains later this afternoon, take your umbrella, as the weather forecast says there will be showers.
Let's look at the next example. If you decide to accept a job offer from another country, your family and friends will support you throughout the whole process, even though it may be a difficult transition at first. The conjunction, in the event that, also has a similar meaning to if. It's simply used in a more formal context. Therefore, changing the position of the clause doesn't change the meaning. It is thus considered an adverbial clause, and the main clause uses the future tense, while the subordinate clause uses the present tense. Now, repeat while paying special attention to clause movement and tense use.
In the event that you decide to accept a job offer in another country, your family and friends will support you every step of the way, even though it may be a difficult transition at first.
I have organized all the conjunctions of time and condition that have appeared on exams so far into one table. As you can see from the table, when can be used in adverbial, noun, and adjective clauses. Also, whenever, if, and whether can be used in both adverbial and noun clauses. While can only be used in adverbial clauses, but since it has two different meanings, we need to be careful. The rest of the conjunctions can be used only in adverbial clauses. As for the conjunction by the time, I will explain it in more detail when we study the perfect tenses. To sum up, all the other time and condition conjunctions introduce clauses whose position can be changed, like adverbial clauses. However, the four conjunctions marked with a triangle require special attention because the clauses they introduce can sometimes switch positions with the main clause and sometimes not. Along with while, which has two meanings, these five conjunctions appear frequently on exams, which means many learners still get confused about tense usage. You don't need to know the grammatical terms, and there's no need to memorize them. If you remember the three checklist points we have carefully discussed so far, you'll have no problem solving questions or applying what you've learned. Just to make sure, let's go over it one more time. The circles in this table show that the conjunction can be used in adverbial, noun, or adjective clauses. It does not mean that the present tense can always replace the future tense. The present tense can replace the future tense only when all the conditions in the checklist are met. Therefore, you must pay extra attention when a conjunction has more than one circle in its horizontal row or when it has more than one meaning. In this video, we took a detailed look at the present tense used in place of the future tense. This is a crucial point for both conversation and exams. The present tense represents all tenses and plays a vital role in subjunctive mood and sequence of tenses, making it a very important tense. Therefore, you need to review thoroughly until you become very comfortable with the present tense. Also, don't neglect your speaking and writing practice using not only the present tense points covered here, but also the vocabulary. We'll continue the tense lecture in the next video. Thank you.